One of the most fiery campaigns in the federal election has ended with a nail-biting finish, with independent Dr Monique Ryan returning as the member for Kooyong in Melbourne's inner east. After a tense week of counting, the incumbent defeated Liberal candidate Amelia Hamer only by several hundred votes. Ms Hamer conceded yesterday afternoon. Dr Monique Ryan joins me now. Dr Ryan, welcome back to Radio National Breakfast and congratulations on your win.
Thanks, Sally.
This was a very tightly fought campaign. What's the past 10 days been like for you waiting for a result?
It is a tense time. It's very hard, undergoing what feels like a very public job interview in front of the whole country and you sit on your hands while your whole team goes and sits in a factory, essentially, scrutineering thousands and thousands of votes again and again. But I have to say, all credit to the AEC, who are still working on a number of other very close campaigns as well. And they've been working incredibly hard. I think sometimes quite challenging conditions for over 8 days now. And we're very lucky to have a healthy democracy where we go through this sort of process and everyone trusts in the result.
Why do you think you won?
Well, over the last 3 years since I was elected to represent Kooyong, I've worked very hard to fulfil the contract that I made with my community, which is that I will listen to them and try to represent them as effectively as I can on the things that matter to them. I have a great team who've responded to issues within the electorate really quickly and effectively, and I heard many times from people how grateful they were for help with the sorts of things that they reach out to the team for. But I've also been able to amplify concerns about things like the cost of tertiary education and the cost of medications in Canberra that I think people, in a way that people have felt has been effective and that they feel, basically meets their needs from their representative.
What do you think the role is for the independents for this term, given that Labor has a majority and it's the Greens in the Senate who will be holding the balance of power?
Well, look, so far since the election, what we've seen is both the Liberals and the Nationals kind of turn on each other, and they're obviously engaged in leadership battles this week. They've got some significant issues, I think, to deal with, and one of them is the fact that they didn't take adequate policy to the federal election. We need an effective opposition in the House of Representatives. That's extremely important, and we need the government to be held to account on the things that communities like Kooyong care about, which are tax reform, housing affordability, climate and the cost of living crisis. And so that will be my job, to hold the government to account on those things.
You've called for real action on issues including climate change. What does real action look like given Labor's majority?
Well, they need to move more quickly with the net zero transition, and we need to have greater clarity for the regions about how electrification will proceed. And, rewiring Australia has been held up, and that's costing us all. We need to have greater clarity around how electrification can work in the suburbs and how homes and businesses can be assisted to get off fossil fuels and to electrify in a way that's quick and effective, which brings down their energy costs quickly, but also takes pressure off the grid. They're all big picture issues where government policy will make a big difference, and they're things that I'll be pushing for in the next 3 years.
The so-called teal independents have got back in, with the exception of Zoe Daniel in Goldstein. Are you surprised by that?
I think we've demonstrated effectiveness as a whole. Zoe and I probably had slightly different challenges in our electorates to some of the other community independents. There's issues at a state level in Victoria and issues within our own communities that have come up that probably the other independents weren't dealing with. But I think that, people do value independent representation. They like to feel that they're being heard, and they like to see that their representative amplifies their concerns. And being able to do so as an independent, as opposed to what backbenchers in parties can do, feels very powerful, and I've heard many times from people in my community that they appreciate it.
It's a big day for the Liberal Party today, with the party set to elect a new leader after the defeat of Peter Dutton. The two frontrunners for the leadership are Angus Taylor and Susan Lee. Who would you prefer to engage with as leader of the opposition?
I would prefer to engage with someone who has a real commitment to action on climate and who has a vision for how our country can do that. I would prefer to engage with someone who has a view on how we can make housing more affordable for Australians and address cost of living crisis. It's remarkable that neither of the contenders for the leadership positions of the Nationals or the Liberal Party have been talking about those sorts of things. These shouldn't be personality contests. They should be contests of ideas and values. And it's disappointing that that's not what we get from the major parties in this country.
You're listening to Radio National Breakfast and you're hearing from Dr Monique Ryan, who has been returned as independent member for Kooyong. Dr Ryan, last time you were on the program, I was asking about political funding, and you said you couldn't say whether Climate 200 was your biggest financial backer for this election. Do you have that information now?
I do, actually, yeah. So the Climate 200, I think, provided about 15% of the funding that I had in this federal election, and that would make it marginally the biggest single sort of source of donations in my election campaign. But I'm going to push back again, Sally, because I still find it extraordinary that you talk about Climate 200, and as do other media outlets, ad nauseum, without talking about the fossil fuel donations to parties like the Liberal Party and the effect of third parties like Australians for Prosperity in Kooyong, where they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a negative ad campaign against me to promote the interests of the Liberal candidate. It's a frustrating thing that the discussion around political donation in this country is so pointed and I think so one-sided.
Dr Ryan, we've got less than a minute up our sleeve. What did you think about the re-election again of Helen Haines as one of the regional independents?
Helen is an amazing representative for the seat of Indi, and I think that over time she and Cathy McGowan have demonstrated to that electorate the value of independent representation, and I think that the rise of independent representation in rural and regional settings is something we're going to see a lot more of in the next 2 or 3 federal elections.
Dr Monique Ryan, thank you very much for making some time after an exhausting election campaign and long count for you in Kooyong. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Bye now.
That's Dr Monique Ryan there, the member for Kooyong. Coming up after 8 o'clock.